Welcome to the Jazzes podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined today by bassist, band leader, composer, and producer, the creative mind and driving force behind a new generational approach to jazz, and of course, best known as the founder of Snarky Puppy, Michael League. Hi, Michael.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I guess I'll start by saying I was having a conversation with Jonathan Frakes, who you may know as plays Commander Riker on Star Trek. And he's a trombonist and a jazz enthusiast, you may or may not know. And one of the things he told me was that his son, Jameson, who's about in his early 30s, turned him on to Snarky Puppy. That was actually part of our interview. And the one thing that I thought was really interesting is that his introduction to Snarky Puppy was by a 30-year-old. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, because I find it fascinating in the music, the ecosystem that you've created, is there in your mind a defining attribute or unique value proposition, not to sound too businessy, that helps Snarky reach audiences outside of the traditional jazz camp?
Sure. Yeah, I would just say it's a mentality. I think that when Snarky Puppy began in 2004, the dominant mentality in jazz was, we're all smarter than you, plebeians, you know? And we wouldn't expect you to understand what we're doing because it's so complicated and we're so elevated. And really our objective when we're playing music is to impress other people who also play this music. And their very unfortunate girlfriends or boyfriends that happen to be dragged along with them to these jazz clubs in the audience, you know? So it was a very exclusive mentality when I was in university. And you saw that in most jazz clubs around the world, you know? And also I think that there was a certain level of elitism and purism. And, you know, by the way, thank you very much for that. It was a very, very flattering introduction. And I really appreciate it. But I also think that I should clarify that, well, not that you weren't saying this, but I should make clear that it is our opinion as a band that we were able to do what we did because we were one of several groups that were working to open doors and to combine forms of music that previously hadn't been combined in a kind of commercially successful way. I'm thinking like specifically of like Roy Hargrove's RH Factor, Robert Glasper's Experiment, Esperanza Spalding. There were several other groups in kind of like the early aughts, you know, mid aughts that were working to take the jazz tradition and not be so precious about in terms of like mixing it with other things. So, you know, you had hip hop coming into the equation. You had electronic music, you know, influence of people like Jojo Meyer and this kind of stuff coming into the equation. And so while Snarky Puppy, I think we, for sure, we helped open a lot of doors, as did these other artists. I think we opened doors in like a specific part of the house, you know, and I think Robert and Esperanza and artists like that were opening doors in like another different other parts of the house. And it was just amazing, the transition, because when we started in 2004, it was really hard to find an electric bass even at a jazz festival, you know, and we were too rock for the jazz world. We were too jazzy for the rock world, you know, because we played a lot of rock clubs, and that didn't go over great either, you know.
Right.
And it was kind of one of these things, just to put it into context, because maybe a lot of people who are going to listen to this were born, you know, after me and don't remember the fact that like in 2002, if you played a tune with the snare on 2 and 4, you were kind of a sellout, or you just weren't deep enough. You know, it's like, oh, he can't swing, she can't swing. So they're playing that simple stuff. Like I said, very elitist mentality in the jazz world. And now the irony is that if you call yourself a jazz drummer and you don't have a good pocket and you can't play hip hop or funk
Right.
or play 2 and 4 well, you're not considered a legitimate jazz musician, you know? So it's like it really did a huge 180. And I think it's a beautiful thing that you have, you know, all of these artists that have kind of don't give a second thought to integration of diverse musical styles, you know, and that like the jazz tradition, which of course, even when we're saying jazz, that's a very controversial word.
Sure.
And we could go into that another time for a very extended period of time, but like, you know, let's just, for now, we'll call it the jazz tradition. That like, it's become totally commonplace to use that as your like base of vocabulary, musical vocabulary, but in no way think of it as something that's creating barriers. It's just kind of an element that's, you know, involved in your music. And I think people are much more, feel much more free to include things that previously weren't considered to be part of the jazz tradition in their music. And it's still kind of jazz adjacent in a sense.
Wow. So what I found fascinating when I first was introduced to you years back is that I didn't come from jazz. I was, you know, I liked the Beatles, and then I got into progressive rock, and then fusion, Chick Corea's Return to Forever. And so fusion for me was not only my introduction, it's always been my base. And I found that an interesting sort of analogy in the growth, development, the maturation, the evolution of Snarky Puppy, in that fusion in some ways. Again, that's the bad, like the 4-letter word jazz, that's a word that we tend to tread on lightly. But fusion becomes an interesting aspect to music that is considered very forward thinking, because when we look at albums and when I listen to your music that comes to mind that turned me into a more of a jazzer is like Jaco Pastorius's Word of Mouth. And that bridge, if you would, you create that bridge. When we launched Jazz Is in 1983, we put out a campaign that said, jazz people help keep jazz small. And we caught a lot of crap for that, as you can imagine. But that elitist mentality is something we tried to break. You've done it musically, which I find really fascinating, because instead of saying, this is really great, you should listen to it, it's sort of like, just sit here and take it in, and you let us know whether it turned you into a kind of music that you weren't listening to before. The last thing I'll say about it, which I find fascinating that you just said, is the audience. The guy, and this is very, I guess, I shouldn't say this, but mostly, especially when I was listening to serious music, it was usually the guy dragging the girlfriend or the wife to the show, and they were a reluctant attendee. But when there's certain kind of music, whether it's Snarky Puppy or the Pat Metheny group, one of the things I've told Pat is I used to love to not look at the band, to look at the audience and watch the faces of the women, if you would, who, or even the guy who maybe the woman dragged the guy there, and just being mesmerized by what was the senses and what they were taking in. And I see that with what you do, but you do it in a very unique way. The other thing I was going to mention is that there was a person who once said that the thing that made the magic of Steely Dan is they played jazz, but they never played too much jazz. But one of the things I find about, and I'd love to hear your take about what you do, is there are some very intense parts of your structure, your orchestration, your composition. And then, like you said, it's not like you just want to have fun, but you're in that groove, and that's bringing people in, and then they're checking out much more sophisticated things in your music that they may not have ordinarily been attracted to, but now you've kind of brought them into what you call your ecosystem. When did you come up with, when was the aha moment, whether it was the development of Snarky Puppy, the early days of Snarky Puppy, where you said, this is the way that we're going to not cram the music down people's throat. they're going to want it. They're going to come in.
I mean, I kind of want to just go back to the mentality thing and, to address the first part of what you were asking. You're talking about how to keep people's attention, while trying to play things that are intricate or complex. And I just think, again, it's mentality. It's like when I'm composing music, I think when the majority of the people in my band are composing music, the objective is not to impress impressiveness upon the audience. You know what I mean? Like, that's not the intention when writing. It's not the intention when performing. When we get on stage, I don't think anyone in my band's and anyone in my band goes on stage with the mindset of, let me make sure everybody in the audience knows what I'm capable of. I don't think anybody, I think we're all going on stage with the idea of, let's make some things that sound nice and that we enjoy listening to. And then if you're of that mentality, for me, that kind of solves more than 50% of the problems you could encounter in terms of making music that reaches people, because you're composing with the music in mind, you're putting your ego aside, you're kind of neutralizing your insecurities. And it's really just all about the things that you play. So when I'm composing, my primary concern is writing something that sounds nice and that moves me. Hopefully I have a level of musicality that's high enough to be able to do that while contributing things that are deep or subtle or intricate or meaningful. But the objective is not to demonstrate what I'm capable of in terms of like musical impressiveness. You know what I mean? So I think that really the objective is just writing things that sound nice and performing them in a way that does them justice and that brings kind of joy to the ritual of making music. And I think that's the thing that people are in tune with, and why the unwitting, boyfriend or girlfriend who's been dragged to the show is capable of enjoying something that they normally don't really listen to aesthetically. And even if they're not really understanding it on a like a, musically deep level, that that's not an objective of ours. You know what I mean? I just want, I mean, really, even I want everyone to have a good time, but that's also not our objective. Our objective is to go on stage and play music in a way that's meaningful to us, to do something that we care about and believe in an authentic and honest way. And I believe that if that is taken care of on the stage, the odds of people liking it in the audience are much higher. So yeah, I would say that the enjoyment factor, like the visceral enjoyment factor, is number one. And any kind of artistic complexity, that's supposed to be something that you can tune into if your radio goes to that frequency, and if it doesn't, it's also not necessary. And I met Pat Metheny actually, for the first time in person a month ago, and we had this really beautiful, like 3-hour conversation in a hotel lobby in the middle of the night. And he was really talking about the importance of melody. And I mean, he's a very brass tacks kind of guy. Like, he does not say something he doesn't mean, and he says a lot of things that a lot of people would be afraid to say. And, he was saying, why I like your band? Because you write melodies, And he was like, most people don't even try to write melodies, actually, like real melodies, And I think that that's one of the reasons why Pat has had such a rich career, is because, as impressive as he is as an improviser, and as, high of a musical level as he has, it's really like he just writes really amazing melodies.
Beautiful songs.
And I think
absolutely
that the idea of the song. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
You just cut out there. I didn't hear you.
Can you? Are you on?
Good.
Good.
Okay. Yeah. I think that the idea. Yeah. No, it's fine. That I think you can create a direct relationship between the lack of popularity of what we'll call jazz-based music, from the kind of like mid 80s to 2012, 13. You can create a direct relationship um, between this period of kind of invisibility in the public eye of jazz, and how song focused it was,
Mhm.
or how little it was focused on songs. And I think that now, for the first time in my life, jazz is cool again,
Mhm.
and you have people who look amazing, people who are stylish, people who are young, playing and listening to the music. Now it's a whole scene. It's like very in vogue now, actually, to like
Mhm.
jazz is cool. It's not just like nerdy stuff for, pompous uh, elitists. And I think you can just draw a direct correlation between like now people are writing songs. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that
Mhm.
no one wrote songs from 1986 to 2013, but like there's really, the song is present in a way that it wasn't present then, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that correlation holds water, and it's exciting to be in a moment in which people are really composing, you know and not just relying on their improvisational excellence to impress audiences, because that has its limits.
Yeah, you reminded me of something that happened to me maybe 20 years ago. A nanny was taking care of my kids. I walked into the house and I turned on a DVD of probably some of the greatest musicians on earth. It was, I think, Peter Erskine, Michael Brecker. Uh, I can't remember the rest of the band now, but it was a DVD. It wasn't Steps, but it was kind of like a quasi Steps Ahead
Mhm.
band. And I was watching it and just mesmerized by the musicianship. And my nanny turned to me and said, "When are they going to start doing something?"
Yeah.
And that moment struck me as saying, okay, I get it. You see, that no matter how amazing those musicians were, maybe the best musicians on earth,
Hmm.
something about it didn't bring her in.
Hmm.
Um, and something about your music does, which is why I follow you so closely, because I'm fascinated by it. And your new
Well,
album, segue into it, unless you wanted to say something.
mm, I do want to, just a quick thing, which is that, we're talking about songwriting, melody, composition, accessibility. Um, I feel that it's very important to mention that so much of the band's energy and attitude and relationship with music is coming from, um, Black American culture, Black American music culture, but just also Black American culture. I mean, we have, you know, 6 members of the band who grew up in the church. And for those of us who didn't grow up in the church, a lot of us spent a lot of our lives playing in churches. I first started playing in Black churches when I was 15.
Hmm.
And when I was in Dallas, I spent 3 years basically only playing in, either in churches or in hip hop and R&B clubs with musicians from churches. And I think that you can't separate that from the way in which we relate to music, and vocabulary, spirit, energy, like that. For me, like the spirit of making music in a Black church in Texas is like just like completely on the opposite side of the spectrum of the mentality of making music in a jazz conservatory.
Hmm.
Intentions, energy, level of joy, level of communication, they're like polar opposites. And most of the people in the band studied jazz in school, and so it was very important for us to get, a very healthy serving of that other thing,
Hmm.
of the energy and intention and spirit that you find in the Black American music community, in order to really give meaning to what we were doing.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? I don't think you can separate the attitude and the energy and the intention that Snarky Puppy has from that of the church, even for those of us who didn't play in it when we were two.
Mhm.
And I think that that's important, and I feel that difference when we travel around the world and we see other bands who are doing like very interesting things, but the accent is very different because, yeah, maybe they grew up in Sweden or something and they heard records, but it's different from like really playing in churches for years. Um, and when you listen to the people in the band who really grew up with it, people like Bobby Sparks or Jason J.T.
Mhm.
Thomas or Jameson Ross or Nikki Glaspie, or, it's like you really, it's just different. It's different than growing up listening to records. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that right now, if you look at the musicians who are most kind of elevated in this scene, this jazz adjacent scene, or whatever you want to call it, probably half are white,
Mhm.
or non-black. Um, but and not but for that reason, I think it's important to make clear that all of us are actually coming from that thing. And it's fascinating to talk with people who don't think that they are, because they actually are without knowing that they are. I know D'Angelo passed away,
Yeah.
of course, last week, and I was a bit turned off by some major publications obituaries of him, basically saying like famed R&B singer who had like a pop moment in the spotlight with Untitled How Does It Feel, passes away. And it's like, no, 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 no. It's
Missed it.
he wasn't just an R&B singer. You know what I mean? This is
Mhm.
like, this is a guy who you do not play. I don't even know if you play music in almost any like popular genre aside from like traditional musics from around the world. I don't know that you can play music in 2025 without being influenced by D'Angelo, even if you never heard a D'Angelo record. And I made a post about that, like saying like, whenever you go somewhere and you hear someone playing drums in this way,
Mhm.
it's because of D'Angelo.
Absolutely.
When you hear people singing in this way, it's because of D'Angelo. And maybe you don't even know that you're like following in a tradition that he evolved. But the fact that you don't know that doesn't mean that it's not true. Just being
Yeah.
ignorant to something doesn't make it not a fact. And I felt that a much better job could have been done by these publications to recognize him as the singular figure of of influence in Black American music over the last several decades. And so it's kind of the same, like I said, when we travel and we hear bands playing in different, uh, you know, countries, that they're taking influence from this tradition that D'Angelo also came from, the Black American musical tradition, even if they think they're doing their own thing, which they can be inside of that. But I think it's important to acknowledge it, especially if you're not Black, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And I agree. I think that when people don't even know the connection, there was a secondary connection that got them there that was rooted in that.
Exactly. And it's important to be curious enough to investigate that and explore that and give that credit where it's due. Because I can tell you, if we had never crossed paths with the Black church, and we had never integrated the band in every sense of that word,
Yeah.
because it was all, I think the first band, well, there was one Asian piano player, but aside from that, everybody else was white, in the first incarnation of the band. And if the band hadn't integrated both racially and stylistically, I I don't know that I'd want to listen to our music today. I mean, that's not to say that I listen to our music anyway, because I'm around it all the time. But like, I think it would sound very different and not in a positive
And in
way.
your videos, and this is why I think it's important for viewers and listeners to watch some of your videos because you can sense that joy.
Mm,
Um, I think you mentioned before about enjoyment. It's not just the audience, the musicians in Snarky Puppy. There's a certain joy that you see when they're performing. I remember, I think it was the video you had with Lala Hathaway, that at the end, I could see the excitement on your face that this was taking place. And that's something I think is missed in the very snooty aspect of jazz that is the antithesis of what you guys do when you get together and make music.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I believe, very strongly that people should be genuine on stage. And I think that no one should have to feel like they have to behave a certain way on stage. If you're the kind of person that's very serious and you don't like to smile when you're playing music, I don't think you should try to smile. I
Right.
think you should just be you, do it the way you want to do it. The most annoying thing in the world is seeing people faking things, especially when they're on stage.
Mhm.
Um, but yes, for sure. I think that because of this kind of toxic mentality that is largely, I think academia is largely to blame for it, in this kind of, if we want to call it this, like kind of jazz dark age, whatever,
Mhm.
when
Mhm.
people weren't really, like this thing that we've talked about in this half hour of chatting. I think that it kind of became this thing of like maybe some people were thinking, no, like I'm too cool to look like I'm having a good time. Maybe it's too vulnerable. But also, I think it comes from a kind of fear. I think it comes from this thing of like, I have to prove myself with the notes that I play. I have to be amazing and I have to be super concentrated. And I don't, and this thing that I'm doing is very deep and very elevated. And so, like, I don't want to kind of cheapen it by having a visual good time. And I think with Snarky Puppy, it's like everybody on stage does what they want to do. I mean, you can look at Bobby Sparks. He looks like he's bored out of his mind during a gig and he's playing the funkiest stuff you ever heard, but he's not bored. He's just like the most, I don't even know what Bobby's heart rate is. It's like 4. You know what I mean? He's like the most chill human being I've ever met in my life. And then you have maybe our trumpet player Maz, who might, be like philosophizing for the first 30 minutes of the gig, and then he might like crowd surf or dance around. And I don't tell anybody what to do or how to do anything. The whole mentality in the band and the attitude is like, just everybody do your thing, be you. I don't tell people to dress a certain way. I don't tell them to do synchronized dance moves. It's like people can just do whatever they want. And even though maybe that's not as like visually appealing at first glance, I think in the long run, it's a thing that everybody perceives, that this is a group of human beings that have freedom and that feel, able to express themselves however they like. And I think that that reaches audiences. And like I said, most of us are coming from this kind of church mentality of joy in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
So,
that's great. So let's jump into the new album, Somni.
sure.
Uh, to me, it's for lack of a better term, it's kind of a sequel to Silva, and it's orchestral and it's big and it's deep, but very musical. So it kind of in the theme of our discussion today. So some parts of it are pretty intense, and then some parts of it are just chill, and then it comes back to intense. It takes the listener on a journey, which is I think one of the most fascinating things that you do with Snarky Puppy. It's whether it's a visual journey or an auditory journey, it's a journey, and I think that's what people gravitate to. How this is your second album with the Metropole Orchestra, who I love what they do. When you were conceptualizing, whether it was Silver or Somni, um, do you go back to those sort of classic, the Klaus Ogerman records, Vince Mendoza or Bob James, and say, I really like that. Um, can we do some of that? Or is this something where you say, I'd rather not do that. I'll try to do something different?
I think the driving force of this band over the 21 years has always been evolution and exploration. And um, while in certain instances, like with the recording of Somni, doing this in a format that we've done before of the filmed kind of in studio thing with the audience with headphones, I think the rule is like, all right, if we're going to do something that we've done before, we have to do some things that we haven't done before inside of that. And that's for sure what the case in Somni. Okay, yes, we're going to do another live record where we build a studio and we put the audience in headphones and we do multiple nights of this new music, but we're going to do it with 12 cameras this time. We're going to do it with the symphony orchestra again, with the Metropole Orchestra, but we're going to change the format. We're going to write completely new original music. We're going to change the setting. We're going to change the lighting, change the video director, the video treatment, the audio engineer. Like there were just so many things that were different. And the idea is like, all right, we're going to do it. Just try to do it better. I mean, I think just having new music alone would also be enough. But yeah, I think we try to improve and variate in every way possible whenever we do something, even if we're doing something that's kind of familiar. So it's the same every night. We do a different set list every night, different people solo on, a certain song every time we play it. I think the band gets very bored very quickly, and that's a positive thing in a lot of senses. It forces us to push forward.
Wow. So I'm going to do an exercise that I did with Pat. I'm not sure he liked it, but I think he did at the end. You've played with some heavy hitters, and you're in good company. I'm going to mention the name, and then the first thing that comes to mind. Bela Fleck.
Deep, like human musician, just so many layers to him as a human and as an artist.
Wow. How about Nana Vasconcelos?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting one.
I got you on that one.
I don't know. I guess in a word like roots.
Yeah. Okay.
You feel how deep the roots of that tree go, for sure.
Salif Keita.
Voice of God.
Mm-hmm. Of course, I have to.
I don't think you need to say. You don't have to say anything else. The voice of God. Yeah.
I have to mention our beloved David Crosby.
I think in a word, inspiration. This guy wrote more music and released more records in the last, between the ages of 72 and 81 than most artists release in their entire careers. I think he was a guy that he was a car that ran on musical inspiration and dished it out for sure.
Corey Wong.
Oh, Corey. I mean, there's a lot of stuff.
There's a lot packed into Corey.
There is, yeah. I mean, I feel like, like exuberance, I would say is the word that comes to mind. He's so expressive, super joyful. I really love how kind of like footloose he is. He just like throws himself into things with 100% confidence. And I think that's admirable in a moment when we're like so easily criticized,
Mm-hmm. How about Jacob Collier?
Yeah, I mean, limitless, I guess would be what I would say. That he's like capable of going so far in any direction. It's kind of like, the sky's the limit in kind of every direction for him.
Mm-hmm. So the last one is one of your longtime collaborators and founding members, Bill Lawrence. By the way, where I think it was "Where You Wish You Were," which I got to ask you about the title of that album, but absolutely gorgeous. I couldn't stop listening to that record.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think Bill is a seeker, I think we're in Istanbul together. He's 3 floors above me right now, playing here tomorrow in Turkey. And, I think, we just went out for lunch and we went out last night. We're going to go see some music tonight. And like, he's constantly in wonder of, in a state of wonder about all of these things that are around us all the time, especially kind of like, he's especially drawn to like spiritual directions. I think he's always looking for something higher, and I think he's got a lot of curiosity, and he's always kind of trying to dig deeper and go for the, reach higher for the next thing. That's what makes him a really incredible person to hang out with and also to make music with.
That's great. So what next? What can we expect? Obviously, you have a new record out, Sambi, which is really a beautiful record. What's on the horizon? Anything you want to share with us that is maybe taking you either evolution of Snarky Puppy or in a new direction?
I'm really just trying to develop as a producer and songwriter. The production side of things has gotten a lot better every year, since I started doing it. And this past year, I had the pleasure of, doing Yusun Dur's new record in my house, which was amazing, having all those incredible musicians coming through my place for a couple weeks. And finishing up a record with Los Muñequitos de Matanzas and Afro Cuba de Matanzas, like the two oldest existing rumba groups together, performing live that we recorded in Matanzas a couple years ago, and some really interesting little projects like a duo EP that I made with a great Catalan singer who lives in New York named Lau Noah, where we're both singing and playing in like very little overdubs and very very different direction, singing in Spanish, which is something I've never recorded, doing. And so just kind of like stretching out in different ways, especially as a producer and a writer. That's more and more appealing to me. Not that touring isn't, but after 20 years of touring, it's kind of like, ooh, at some point this has to slow down. And the other stuff is maybe a little more sustainable. So, I just talked with my good friend Fatoumata Diawara. We're going to do something together, do a record together, I think, in the next couple months. So just trying to stay learning and around people who are inspiring and most importantly, lovely to be around as humans. And if things stayed as they are now, I'd live another 800 years happily, hoping that nothing shakes up the music industry in threatens it in an existential way. That's another conversation, but I'm just kind of like holding out as long as I can here.
Well, we want to keep listening and continue to be inspired by all the music you do. And thank you for that. And thank you for being here today. It was a great conversation. Great to have you, Michael.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.